So Brian, Jeep says that they plan to be the greenest SUV brand in America.
That's a pretty lofty goal, but there's really only one competitor out there that is an all-SUV brand that even has plug-in hybrids on offer, and that's Land Rover.
That's true. And Land Rover is, of course, a very direct competitor to this Jeep. This is the new plug-in hybrid Grand Cherokee. And inside and outside and on the trail, there are definitely a lot of Land Rover and Range Rover parallels. But if you want to spend a little less money and you want something that's arguably a bit more capable in some situations, then you want to get your hands on the new Grand Cherokee 4Xe.
All right, so the key points to take away from the 4Xe Grand Cherokee are the fact that it gets 25 miles per gallon of pure electric range, 23 miles per gallon once you switch to full hybrid mode, 375 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque, which makes it the quickest Grand Cherokee you can buy.
But other than that, it looks exactly like the rest of the Grand Cherokee lineup. So trim level for trim level, this is going to be having the same grille, the same kind of tow hooks, etc. that we find in the other models, except that the accents become teal. So around the Jeep logo, we get little teal accents there, and the tow hooks become teal if you're driving a model with that option. This is the top-end Summit Reserve trims. This is the most expensive way you can get your Grand Cherokee with a plug. At least for the moment, the plug-in hybrid system is available only in the 2-row version of the Grand Cherokee, although you can bet that a 3-row version is coming at some point soon. So Brian, what do you think might compete with this? Because this is really the only thing in its segment that is so off-road worthy.
I think you could look at Land Rover, Range Rover Sport, which has a plug-in hybrid version, and I think it shares a couple of key components with this powertrain. Yeah,
the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission is very, very similar. The electric motor pack is very similar because it's made by ZF as well. Although the design of this system is definitely unique to the Jeep, it does share components with luxury vehicles. So this has the same 8-speed automatic transmission in essence that we find in a BMW X5 plug-in hybrid, which in many ways is the only direct competitor to this particular one that I keep thinking of, aside from that Range Rover Sport. But there's also, price-wise, a Lincoln Aviator with 3 rows. There's a Volvo XC90 with the plug with 3 rows in the back. And then I guess you could take a look at a Lexus SUV.
Yeah, the GX and LX, while they're both 3 rows, they are definitely very off-road capable and very similarly sized to this, at least the GX is. And the GX is due for a redesign very soon and may very well be getting an electrified powertrain in the future. So that could become even more of a competitor in the coming years.
But compared to the average vehicle in the mid-size crossover or SUV segment in the United States, this is really going to be the only mainstream brand vehicle that's going to give you an adaptive height air suspension with the kind of ground clearance that we're looking at here, the kind of approach, departure, breakover angles, and 24 inches of water fording ability that are pretty unique to the Grand Cherokee. Outside of this, you're going to be looking at those more expensive Range Rover models. Moving around to the rear, again, the design is very similar to the non-plug-in hybrid model where we have dual integrated exhaust tips down here on the rear bumper, and again, the green badging Summit right there. Now, you're not a big fan of this black bar that connects the tail lamp modules, right?
Right, now you probably can't see it because of all the dust we have on this one right now, but on these short wheelbase models, you get this sort of, I don't know, ski mask looking black bar that connects it to your taillights. I prefer the cleaner look of the Grand Cherokee L where it's just completely separated like that and clean there. Let us know what you think about that difference. I prefer the other way.
Yeah, it is surprising that Jeep decided to actually restyle the front and the back end of the Grand Cherokee a little bit when they stretched it for the 3-row model. So the rear end is not exactly the same, and the front end, even though they look like part of the family, it's not exactly the same either.
This 4Xe powertrain will not be replacing any of the Grand Cherokee's current powertrains, so we still have a 3.6-liter Pentastar V6 as the base engine, which has 293 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. Then you can upgrade to that big 5.7-liter V8 with 357 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque.
Then we have the drivetrain that we're all here to talk about, the new 4Xe plug-in hybrid system. It's based around a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. This produces 270 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque in its own right. It's mated to 2 motor generator units. One is a belt-driven motor generator unit right here up front. It produces 44 horsepower and 39 pound-feet of torque. Its main objective is to start and stop the engine and to generate power for the drivetrain systems. Then between the engine and the 8-speed automatic transmission, we have another motor generator unit that is good for 134 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque. Everything put together gives you 375 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque. The big deal with this plug-in hybrid system really is that everything that is the plug-in hybrid system is located either under the hood or completely under the body. So this has the exact same kind of passenger space and cargo room that we find in the regular Grand Cherokee. If you want to know more about this plug-in hybrid system, there is a video over at EV Buyer's Guide, our second channel there, where I take a deeper dive into the way this system works.
Behind door number 1 here is the grand prize, the port to your onboard 7.2 kilowatt charger, which charges this 17.3 kilowatt hour battery in about 2.5 hours on a level 2 charger. That's going to be a smaller battery than what you get in the X5 plug-in hybrid and the XC90 plug-in hybrid, but it's a little bit more than the Lincoln Aviator's plug-in hybrid battery. Disclaimer, we don't exactly know how much of the 17.3 kilowatt hours is usable in this situation, but I'd estimate it's about 15 to 16 kilowatt hours. The air suspension, which is a feature on Trailhawk trims and higher, can raise the Grand Cherokee 4xE's ride height up to almost 11 inches.
Likely due to the added weight of the battery pack and the electric motors, the towing capacity on the 4xE is the lowest in the Grand Cherokee family at 6,000 pounds. The V6 is rated for 6,200 pounds and the V8 for 7,200 pounds. If you're worried about what happens when the battery pack is completely exhausted, keep in mind that like many hybrids out there, this will default to a mode where the battery pack is kept charged at a specific level, so that you always have a little extra oomph for hill climbing or for passing someone out on the open highway. But there are logically times where you could be reduced to just what the 4-cylinder engine puts out, and that's why this still has a turbo and still produces nearly 300 pound-feet of torque. As with the regular Grand Cherokee, front seat comfort is excellent, especially in the top-end trims. This has a very adjustable driver's seat and front passenger seat. It's an extending thigh cushion, inflatable side bolsters, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, 2-position memory for the driver and the front passenger, and available seat massage for both the driver and front passenger. That's controlled via a button on the door and then via the infotainment system for actually specifying which massage mode you want. Now let's hop into the back seat, because the back seat is pretty generously sized. The Grand Cherokee has continued to grow generation over generation, and a big beneficiary has been the back seat here. Now, because of the way they've packaged the 4xE componentry, we have the same kind of legroom, same kind of headroom, the same kind of shoulder width back here. Everything is completely under the body, and the Grand Cherokee doesn't have a terribly tall hump. There is definitely one here, but it's not as big as in previous generations. This model has 4-zone automatic climate control with heated and ventilated rear seats. The rear seats also offer a reasonable amount of recline. You can see it's about 7 inches or so. Plug-in hybrid comparisons or not, the Grand Cherokee has a big cargo area, just under 38 cubic feet of storage space right back here in the rear. Now, you will notice that the load-in height in the back is definitely higher off the ground than the average crossover that you might want to cross-shop with some Grand Cherokee offerings. 2 big reasons for that: we definitely have departure angles that are focused on off-road driving, and if I lift up the load floor, we have almost a full-size spare tire. This is not quite full-size, but at a 245/65 R18, this is an awful lot closer than your average. There's also a little bit of additional storage space under here, and this is where they put the EVSE that comes with the vehicle. Let's start our interior look on the passenger side, where we find a really interesting standard feature on the 4xE model, which is a standard passenger side infotainment screen. This offers some infotainment options as well as navigation. You can also do a few other things like view the camera angles in the vehicle, but you cannot CarPlay or Android Auto on that screen. Moving up to the ceiling, we find the buttons for the large panoramic moonroof as well as the buttons for the telematic system. The panoramic moonroof goes to just about the rear passenger's torso or so, not quite to the headrest. We do have well-integrated sunshades for the rear passengers, 4-way adjustable headrests, and height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. Jeep calls this leather color Tupelo. It is sort of a dark honey color. I think it's really attractive with the rest of the interior accents. You can see we have some contrasting piping. The center of the seat is perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. Then we have some additional stitching right over there on the side bolsters. The side bolsters on the seat back cushion are adjustable. Moving over to the front doors, there's lots of soft touch material going on here, but you won't find that in all the trims. So if you get the lower end trims, then the lower portion of the dashboard is not a stitched material. It is a harder injection molded plastic. But you do get the better interior bits if you're willing to pay for them, along with the wood trim that we find in this model, which really has some interesting design touches to it. It definitely has a lot of curvature to it, making it feel a bit more premium than some of the wood that we find even in other luxury vehicles. Moving over here to the dashboard, you'll notice that I can't see the passenger screen from the driver's side. It is still on, but I can't see it from over here. That's a safety precaution. More of that stitched material going on at the bottom of the dashboard. Pretty decently sized glove compartment, although you might not be able to fit a 12-inch tablet computer inside. Again, all that stitching going on here, stitched lower portion, stitched middle portion, stitched upper portion, wood trim that curves as it goes into this large touchscreen infotainment system. This is just over 10 inches as well. There's a row of buttons on the top for max regen mode. This is not a one-pedal drive mode, but it does really bump up the regen. We have lane keeping assist, traction stability control on-off, parking sensors, self-parking, and then a button to turn on and off that passenger screen over there. As you can see, this screen supports CarPlay or Android Auto integration, but it will only ever use the middle portion of the screen. The upper upper portion of the screen is reserved for system functions like climate control right there, and the lower portion is also reserved for other system functions like direct access buttons to things like climate, navigation, CarPlay, vehicle interface, etc. This display is pretty snappy. There's some dedicated electric vehicle screens here like the power flow there. You can see what's going on. Climate control's using 1 kilowatt there. There's a driving history option, schedules for your charging, e-save mode. You can tell it just to save the battery or to actually charge the battery up to 40, 60, or 80%. And then if I go over to charge settings, I can adjust the charge rate by just clicking on these buttons here, low, medium, high, etc. And then based on the level that you've chosen, it will tell you how long it would take to charge the battery. So on high, it would take 2 hours, 21 minutes to get the battery completely full. If you're not a fan of touch controls for things like climate control, don't worry, there are physical buttons just below that. Lots of physical buttons, as a matter of fact. Mute button, power volume knob there, controls for the heated and ventilated seats, heated steering wheel, toggles for the climate control system there, defogger, defroster, mode selection down there, auto button right there in the middle. Just below that, there's a storage area with a Qi wireless charging mat, 4 USB inputs, 2 USB-C, 2 regular USB, and an HDMI input for that passenger infotainment screen. Then below that, we find the controls for the drivetrain. In the middle of everything, we have a knurled knob for the shifter. To the left of that, we have the drive mode select. This includes the off-road modes as well as auto and sport mode. This is where we find a button for the 2-speed transfer case. On this side, we find the toggle for the adaptive air suspension. If you were in a vehicle with a locking sway bar disconnect, that would be right over there. Just behind that, we have 2 large cup holders. You can close them off with that little cover. Between the front seats, we find a padded armrest. It opens for 2 tiers of storage, one small one there, and then one deeper storage well. On the driver's side, we have a full color heads-up display. It's approximately 10 inches inside, but it's pretty hard to film in the strong daylight that we have right now. Just below that, we find a standard just over 10-inch LCD instrument cluster. The bulk of this display is pretty similar to the regular Grand Cherokee. There are a ton of different layouts that you can choose from in here. Lots of EV-specific gauges, so you can see exactly what's going on with the hybrid drivetrain. Obviously, your trip computer readouts there. There's sort of a tableau view that you can pull up with various little modules, so you can see what's going on with each of those particular options. And you can opt for a full map display right here in the middle as well. Although it is worth noting that this map display will never give you satellite imagery like you might find in a modern Audi. The steering wheel is a 4-spoke design with sport grips up top, wood trim on the bottom. You can see the wood trim curves up there to be a part of the side spokes as well. The button module on the left side controls that multifunction LCD cluster. The button module on the right side controls the adaptive cruise control and the aggressive lane centering feature. On the back of the steering wheel, we have paddle shifters up and down, with up on the right side there. And then behind the steering wheel, you can see that they're not full paddle shifters. It's just this sort of 1-inch section on top, because below that we have toggles for volume up, down, mode, track forward, backward, etc. Those are all on the back of the steering wheel. On the left side, we find the mode buttons for the hybrid system. They're fairly self-explanatory. Hybrid uses whatever power source it thinks is most efficient for the time. Electric tries to drive in electric-only operation as long as possible. E-Save will either save the battery for later or it will charge the battery based on what you've selected in the infotainment system. No Jeep event would be complete without an off-road course, so of course we have one to showcase the fact that the plug-in hybrid version of the Grand Cherokee has basically the same capability as the rest of the lineup, including 24 inches of water fording capability. Coming out of the water, you'll definitely notice the improvement in traction that we get thanks to Jeep's 4-wheel drive systems. The 4-wheel drive system in the 4By-Eee is basically the same as the rest of the Grand Cherokee lineup. We have that E-limited slip differential in the rear, which basically acts as an E-locker and as a torque vectoring differential, and then power is shuttled around front axle left to right by the brake-based system. The way Jeep has packaged the 4By-Eee drivetrain components is also important for off-roading. They have additional skid plates in the 4By-Eee models in order to protect the battery modules, the inverter module, etc. underneath the vehicle. And that really pays dividends when it comes to driving on rocky surfaces like this. That's also part of the reason that the 4By-Eee Grand Cherokee is definitely heavier than the non-4By-Eee model. The weight penalty is about 700 pounds. Although the Grand Cherokee has grown generation over generation, they still have a dedication to a tight turning radius, and that is essential for off-road courses like this, where as you can see, they're trying to snake the Grand Cherokee around here. It's very tight corners. Definitely lots of tricky traction situations here. And in this situation, the rear axle is not actually even locked. It's just using the limited slip functionality of that electronic differential and the brake-based system up front. In really tight off-camber situations, the E-limited slip rear axle is definitely a benefit to the Grand Cherokee, because in a vehicle that simply had traditional lockers and they didn't have this ability to mechanically lock and torque vector across the rear axle, you could actually end up sliding down the hillside, and that's not what you want to do in tricky rocky situations like this. In these kind of off-road maneuvers, you will also definitely notice the second generation of the Grand Cherokee's airlift suspension. The first generation of this air suspension really felt rough around the edges, I guess you'd say, when the vehicle was at its maximum extent of suspension travel. So when it was either at the very bottom or at the very top, there were definitely some loud bangs and thumps, etc. going on. They have certainly improved that with this generation of the system. This also has adaptive damping characteristics now. The previous generation of the Jeep air suspension did not adaptively damp. This now does both. It will adjust for lift and it will adjust for damping. You can see in situations like this vehicle is definitely very, very rigid. It really kicks those wheels up pretty easily. That is also a hallmark of the unibody structure of the Grand Cherokee, as well as the independent suspension. Now that you know a little bit more about the Grand Cherokee's off-road capabilities, let's talk about how it drives on the road. The Grand Cherokee is definitely targeted at the audience that might live out here in Texas in these broad open spaces on gravel roads, etc., or people like me that live out in the country in California as well, because this is the kind of vehicle that is just as at home on a rougher road like the one that I'm on here, or out on the open highway. And the Grand Cherokee has always been that kind of a balanced vehicle. Obviously, it needs the off-road and rock crawling performance to make enthusiasts happy, but it also needs to be daily driver livable. So even if we're talking about the Trailhawk version of the Grand Cherokee, this brings off-road convenience along with a lot of comfort out on the road. But first, let's talk about the performance numbers. Obviously, we haven't had this at home to do the full battery of comparisons and tests with just yet, but according to Jeep, they said this was going to be the fastest Grand Cherokee available, right, Brian?
Yeah, it was about 60 seconds to 0 to 60.
Yeah, so supposedly this is going to be nearly a second faster than the V8, they said.
Right. Now, this isn't going to be as fast as some of its competition like Lincoln Aviator and maybe the X5 plug-in hybrid or even the XC90 plug-in hybrid, but it's still quick enough for anybody else who's going to need a car like this.
I will say, though, that the transitions between hybrid modes in this are way smoother than in the Aviator plug-in hybrid. I was really quite shocked that for a luxury vehicle, transitions between gas mode and hybrid mode and electric mode, they're just not very smooth in that car.
Well, the other thing I really like about the setup in here is the control you have over the system underneath. I mean, you can tell it, hey, I want it to charge the battery while I'm driving along in gas-only mode, or I can say I have enough electricity left that I can just strictly be in, electric power only. I like that you can sort of switch between the two, and other cars allow you to do that, but there are actually hard buttons on the dashboard that let you toggle between these three different modes.
Yeah, no need to worry about the infotainment system, etc. Right. And then we have that more aggressive regen brake pedal feel if you're interested in that. It's not going to give you one pedal, though.
But it is pretty strong. I mean, it slows you down. You feel it happening. It's not weak at all.
Yeah, if you're interested in a plug-in hybrid with one pedal at the moment, Volvo's product line is the only one I can think of, actually, and that's very recent. They just started doing that with the sort of 22.5 extended range versions. Right. Although I don't have official 6-0 stopping distances just yet, you can expect this to be the longest stopping distance Grand Cherokee available, because this is now the heaviest. This is hundreds of pounds heavier than the 5.7 liter V8, primarily because of the battery, the electric motors, and all the extra protection that goes into them.
Right, but luckily the lower center of gravity keeps the car feeling, very planted and very close to the ground, even though we have a good amount of ground clearance. So in that regard, it definitely feels solid with its weight, and it carries it well.
Yeah, according to Jeep, the center of gravity is now 2 inches lower, and this has actually shifted some more weight to the rear, so this is a little bit better balanced, actually, than most of the Grand Cherokee models, although Grand Cherokee is generally very well balanced anyway. This is about 52-48%, so 52% of the weight up front, 48% in the rear. Back out on a rougher paved section of road, you can certainly tell that the Grand Cherokee is designed for this kind of off-roading adventure, especially when equipped with the adaptive air suspension. This is not going to be as firmly sprung as the X5 or an Audi or a Mercedes-Benz GLE, because the audience for this is someone that wants to take it further off the beaten path, and you need a softer suspension for that. Now, this Summit Reserve trim that we're in, this has the lowest profile tires available in the Grand Cherokee, so this particular model is going to be firmer than that Trailhawk. But I have to say, the Overland model, it had a pretty good ride to it.
Yeah, because those are the smaller wheels and the beefier tires, and it was still a very nice interior and everything, so that's a good balance between the Trailhawk and this model if you're looking for that more off-road comfort and on-road smoothness and isolation.
Right. Yeah, and definitely get the adaptive air suspension if you're interested in the better ride quality of the Grand Cherokee. It's still good in the lower end trims. I talk a little bit more about that in the full review of the regular Grand Cherokee, but in this model, it actually is still very livable. Of course, for official cabin noise tests, you'll have to wait till we get this at home, because we haven't been driving this on the usual test surfaces, and there may be some minor differences between this and the non-plug-in model. Now let's talk about the way the hybrid system operates. I can go ahead and put this in electric-only mode, And now that the vehicle has decided to stop the engine, I can definitely cruise along at highway speeds with no problem. If I floor the vehicle for too long, however, it is going to turn on the gasoline engine to give you maximum acceleration. So this will never completely lock out the gas drivetrain. If you want that kind of feature, you're going to have to look somewhere else. Now let's move over to hybrid mode.
And this mode just chooses the right combination of electricity and gas for the situation you're in, and that's, the balance between the two, and it works really well.
And this is the mode that the car seems to default to whenever we turned it off and then turned it back on. It always seemed to default to hybrid mode, whether the battery was full or whether the battery was partially full. According to Jeep, this mode is going to be a little bit more aggressive at turning on the gasoline engine, but it is still going to default to the electric motor when you're just steady state driving. We already covered eCharge mode's functionality a little earlier, but one thing that surprised me is that over a highway journey of about 50-55 miles or so, the battery only ended up charging by about 30% in that time, so it's not going to charge terribly quickly. If you want to take this to the off-road park and off-road in EV-only mode, it's going to take you a long time to actually do that.
Yeah, and like for example, we took pretty much a road trip to get out to where we are right now, and that was about a 2-hour drive. That, or maybe 3-4 hour drives would be perfect for if you really want to fill up that 25-mile range of the battery. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's not going to do it fast enough if you do a short jaunt across town.
And of course, keep in mind that it's still going to be charging using the gasoline engine, and it is going to drop your fuel economy versus just driving in hybrid mode. Charging the battery and then discharging the battery, that's not as efficient as just driving it like a hybrid. On the fuel economy front, this is EPA rated for 23 mpg. We haven't been able to do a whole lot of testing out here because of all the different kinds of driving that we've been doing, but I will pop our fuel economy run once I actually get this to gas only mode and then reset the trip fuel economy number, and then we drive back out on the open highway to Austin, Texas. I'll go ahead and pop that number in the video. But this one is rated for 23 mpg according to the EPA.
And keep in mind the 3.6 liter V6 can get up to 22 miles per gallon, usually around 21, just depends on which model you go with, which trim level. So the 23 on this is just 1 mile per gallon better overall. So
yeah. Your driving style will really depend on whether or not this is more efficient than that one. If you're doing a lot of in-city driving, the hybrid mode is going to make this more efficient. If you're doing a lot of open highway driving, the V6 may actually be more efficient.
But then of course the 5.7 liter is down at 17 miles per gallon combined. Yeah. So if you're really into towing long distances and you need that sort of capability in that regard, that's going to be your option. But 17 miles per gallon is, nothing great.
And this is going to give you better performance with actually a pretty significant fuel economy bump. It may not sound like a lot going from 17 to 23, but the effect on your pocketbook is actually pretty huge making that jump, especially keeping in mind that in real world driving, you're probably not going to actually get 17 mpg with that 5.7 liter engine. And this is going to be an awful lot closer to its EPA rating. Jeep would also like you to know that the 5.7 liter V8 is going to be a little bit more expensive to lease than this plug-in hybrid as well. So since a lot of Grand Cherokees are leased, this may actually be a good option for people.
Yeah, and a lot of plug-in hybrid and even electric car buyers are actually trying to lease their cars and not fully buy them right now. So that puts us right in line in sight of people who are looking to lease cars like this.
Yeah, and according to ALG, the resale value expected on the plug-in hybrids, probably due to the success of the Wrangler 4xe, is quite high. So theoretically, the resale value of this may actually be better than a Grand Cherokee V8, which is already excellent for the segment. If you want to get your hands on the Grand Cherokee with a plug, head down to your Jeep dealer now because these should be rolling silently onto dealer lots right around the same time that you're watching this video. Be prepared to bring a bit more cash with you, however, than a base Grand Cherokee because this is going to start at $57,700 for the base plug-in hybrid model, plus of course a $1,795 destination charge.
But as opposed to the internal combustion engine Grand Cherokee, this base model comes equipped with a few more extra features like the passenger display and the panoramic sunroof.
It actually comes very well equipped. So like for like, this is not going to be as much more versus the regular Grand Cherokee as you might think, but it is going to start higher in that lineup. You will qualify for the $7,500 tax credit, however.
And then one rung up is the Trailhawk, which has, of course, all of the off-road bits that get you off the beaten path, including the Quadra Drive 2 system with the electronic rear limited slip differential, as well as a bunch of other bits that help make this the true off-road Grand Cherokee.
Including that sway bar disconnect feature up front. That's going to be $62,485.
And then there's a $65,760 Overland trim, which sort of sweetens the deal in the middle there.
It has a lot of luxury features that you might want in your Grand Cherokee with a lot of the off-road capability in that Trailhawk model. It still has the tow hooks, for instance, up front and in the back, but it doesn't have that sway bar disconnect, oddly enough.
And of course, if you want the truly luxurious experience in your plug-in hybrid Grand Cherokee, that's going to be in the Summit trim level. $69,820 gets you into the club, and that includes features like the Macintosh stereo system with 19 speakers. You can get a bunch of other cool stuff, and I think that's a really luxurious option in this segment.
Yep, and the fully loaded one is the one that we've been driving, the Summit Reserve. It started at $74,300. It has a little bit of extras on this particular model, but it comes very well equipped for that one price. Now, that is definitely knocking on the door of some Land Rover models, but it's also about $10,000 less expensive than the closest competitor with a plug from Britain. As usual, for official scores, detailed pricing, and comparisons, you're going to have to wait till we get this at home to run it through those usual battery of comparisons and tests. But at least for the moment, Brian, if you were cross-shopping against a Grand Cherokee 4xe, what would you be cross-shopping this against?
Well, I think the closest combination of sporty driving, luxury, and off-road capability is going to be the Range Rover Sport plug-in hybrid, which is just a little bit more than this, but again, just as capable in most aspects that this one is. But I think a little bit down the other direction would be the Lincoln Aviator plug-in hybrid. Though it is more, luxury and comfort-oriented, that is still a really powerful plug-in hybrid. It still has a decent all-electric range and good miles per gallon once it's in hybrid mode. That's a really good option to consider between the three.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be faster. The Aviator's going to be faster than this. It has more power. It doesn't have quite as much electric range, interestingly enough. And the Range Rover is about $10,000 more starting. And that's not going to get you the same kind of feature content we find in here, even at this top-end $74,300 price point. And something like a BMW X5 and the Volvo XC90, they're going to be right around this price. And again, they're not going to have that same kind of feature content. But of course, the big difference between those and this is that they're not going to have the same kind of off-road ability either. I suspect if my money were on the line, I would be really torn between something like this and the recently refreshed Volvo XC90. Simply because it has a great luxury interior, it has a lot of power, but again, you have to decide whether or not you want that off-road capability. It's going to be just about as expensive as this, but it's going to have really not the same level of off-road capability as even the base version of the Grand Cherokee 4xe. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and what would you choose if your money was on the line, especially if you were looking to spend around $65,000 or so. And keep in mind, this does qualify for the full $7,500 federal tax credit, something that we likely will not see on that Lincoln Aviator coming soon because Ford is running out of tax credits.
As always, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Alex on Autos, and of course EV Buyer's Guide, the separate channel for EV content. We've got a video on this on the Powertrain. You can go check that out for more detailed information on this powertrain. Other than that, we will see you on the next one, and thanks for watching.